रहे हैं. Tribal economy is a very complex subject. Again, because very less is known about it. Just as we know little about tribals, their life, the problems that they face, tribal economy obviously is a thing, a subject which is less known, and I'm sure with the kind of expertise Dr. Hatekar has, I know him for such a very long period of time. I'm sure he's going to throw light on the subject, and we will be certainly be more informed at the end of the end of his session. Ethos, tribal ethos as such, is again a very unique or a different kind of a thing, which again we need to understand. हम हमारी संस्कृति में विविधता में एकता ये बोलते हैं, पर उसमें जो विविधता है, उस विविधता के बारे में हम सोचे समझे, और ट्राइबल इथॉस जो वनवासी आदिवासियों का जो स्वत्व है वो कैसे अलग है, थोड़ा सा कैसे स्पेशल है, विशेष है, ये भी हम समझें. क्योंकि अगर वो हम नहीं समझे तो जो वनवासी हमारे बांधव है उनका जो व्यक्तित्व है वो हम नहीं समझ पाएंगे. तो आई एम श्योर दैट इन द सेकंड सेशन वी विल अंडरस्टैंड मोर अबाउट tribal ethos, which is so very important to understand the personality of the tribal community itself, the special characteristics of the tribal community itself. So I welcome you all, and I request Anuya to take the proceedings further. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now call upon Mr. Milind Thatte to take over the proceedings from here onwards. Yes, sir, we can see you. If you could unmute. Yes.
Thank you, Anuya. Thank you, Dr. Bhagwat. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you for this second day of our lecture series. I will briefly introduce TEER Foundation. The name is, as you heard, it is TEER. It is acronym for Tribal Ethos and Economics Research. We informally began our work last September 2020, with the support of a small group of friends and well-wishers. And quite recently, in last month, we got registered as a non-profit company. Our vision is to influence state and non-state policies to ensure tribal livelihood and natural resource security for the tribal people. So basically, we conduct field research and policy research to proactively examine and expose the impact of laws and policies on tribal ethos regarding natural resources and their economics. It often happens that people at large think of tribals as a different planet or a disconnected world. People assume that as general urban citizens of India, we have nothing really to do with the tribes. हमें क्या फर्क पड़ता है? That remains a big question. So I would like to throw a little light on that. Many major rivers are born in tribal areas. Many water bodies that cities survive on get their water from sources in tribal areas. These areas host the best forests, the global biodiversity hotspots. These areas contain mineral wealth, and almost all state borders are marked with such areas. The tribal population largely depends on primitive farming and on gathering of forest produce for their livelihood. But it was only 12 years ago that the parliament recognized their livelihood rights. So there has been an extreme backlog of development in terms of access to resources, in terms of connectivity, infrastructure, livelihood. This is a result of colonial laws and bureaucratic stranglehold of resources. People are often forced to take up violent means and are lured by extremists. Such extremism cannot be eliminated simply by imposing state force. It needs better policies and administrative framework that can respond to people's aspirations. TEER exists to bring such policies. Currently, we are working closely with the government of Madhya Pradesh. We are also members in tribes advisory councils of Maharashtra and Gujarat state, and we are also working with Ministry of Tribal Affairs on some issues. Now I hand over the mic to my fellow director of TIR, Smita Vangankar, to introduce the first speaker today and moderate the first session. Smita ji, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Milin. Sorry, due to some technical reason, I can't turn on my camera. Uh, Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Today's session is on tribal economy, past, present, and future. All we are aware that tribals are some of the most marginalized group in the country. Uh, economic Upward economy mobility among the tribals is lower than the nearly every other social category in the country. We can't deny the fact that the process of economic growth is not inclusive. It is not equally, or I can say that it's not benefited to all the segments of the society. So often tribal community are economically deprived as well as exploited. There are few questions. I think these are the key questions that need to be asked. Are we consider the tribals as a contributor or a partner in the development process, or they are the mere beneficiaries? Again, do we need different approaches or a different economic models to empower those tribal communities? At the same time, what is the role that we have expected from the state and also the non-state actors? Uh, we are really grateful to have Dr. Neeraj Hartekar today's session. As we all know that he is a very learned, experienced academician in the field of economy. I would like to give brief introduction of him. Dr. Neeraj Hartekar, welcome. He's currently is the director of the Quest, is a unit of a tribal department of Government of India. He has been the director of MSEPP, Mumbai School of Economic and Public Policy, based in University of Mumbai since the year 2014 to 17. He led certain projects through this for the tribal department, such as assessment of a direct benefit scheme to tribal students, preparation of the state policy for a livelihood of particularly vulnerable groups. Also, he started a diploma course on community forest resource management, which was a unique experiment in the country, and it was conducted in the tribal village in Gadchiroli. He also led a study on developing Maharashtra state policies towards the most backward tribes, that is particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So again, welcome Dr. Neeraj, and I request him to start his presentation.
So let's start with understanding why we need a different approach to tribal livelihoods and tribal economy in general. So first, let me start by critiquing the existing models of economic growth and development that we followed since 1991 from liberalization. Now, when we talk about the economy and when we public discourse, we find the word economic growth cropping up again and again. Everybody is concerned about economic. So, what would be the rate of economic growth? Whether it be 6%, whether it be 7%, and that seems to be the single most important number when the economic progress of a country or really evaluating economic policy is concerned. Everybody wants to have as fast an economic growth rate as possible. Now, why has this term come around? What does that mean? What do we want? Now, in particular sense, in a broader theoretical sense, it's sensible to chase this called economic growth, because faster economic growth, bigger is size of the cake in the long. So, for example, if we are growing at around 6%, 7%, and if we grow for about 12 years consistently, then that means at the end of 12 years or 14 years, we would actually be doubling per capita income. Okay, so when we double per capita income, what does it mean? It means in theory, everybody has more of everything, twice the amount of everything, right? So there are more shirts, more clothes, more medicine, more food, everything else per capita, right? And that is the whole ending, and that's why raising per capita raising the rate of economic growth seems to be a very important policy prescription after 1991. The protagonists say that if we grow faster, we'll have more revenues to deal with poverty, right? So faster economic growth also reduces poverty. That is the general agreement. The faster you grow, faster the is the trickle down effect. So basically, what is the idea? The idea is that you encourage large scale investment. Investment can come either from private enterprise, investment can come from government, or investment can come from foreign investors. Large moment there is investment in the economy, growth is propelled. Faster growth means that slowly, if there is investment in one sector, then that creates demand for products of other sectors. Like for example, if you build roads, then if you build roads, that it would attract labor from rural areas to urban areas, and when people from rural areas to urban areas, the wage rate in the rural areas goes up, and therefore the poor in the rural areas benefit. So that is the kind of a broad theoretical understanding of the impact of large-scale investment-driven economic growth process that we have in this country. Now, I'll not say that this model is entirely wrong. In some sense, it has benefited. So, for example, we know that the average standard of living in India today is far superior to what it was in 1990, before in the 1980s or the 70s, and we don't see that kind of poverty anymore really in our countryside. In fact, the year 2004-5 to 11-12 were the periods where India experienced the fastest rate of economic growth and also the fastest rate of reduction of rural and urban poverty both. So I can grant up to a point that there is some point to changing the rate of economic growth. I would also say that this model does not necessarily work. In particular, does not work for tribal communities, and I'm going to give some examples. Generally, a very famous quote in economics says that if you raise rising tide raises all boats. So the idea is that faster growth benefit all people in the society, right? So the rich become richer and the poor. Right? I'm going to critique this idea. My point of view is that economic growth, when you open up opportunities, what essentially happens is when economic growth, it opens up many opportunities for people to benefit from that opportunity. And then people who have the resources, who have the skills, the resources, who have the cultural and social capitals to be able to benefit from these opportunities, actually benefit from these opportunities. Whereas communities, individual groups who do not have the same amount of resources, social, cultural capitals, use these opportunities constructively, actually fall back. In fact, many certain social groups who are better placed can actually at the cost of groups which are not so well placed. So contrary to the general argument that faster economic growth benefits everybody, I would say that faster economic growth can also be cannibalistic, where some groups grow by feeding off resources owned by other. And I would give you a classic example of this. I'm in Maharashtra. In Maharashtra, we have three communities, tribal communities, which are classified as particularly vulnerable tribal groups. They are the Madia, the Katkiris, and the. Now, the Madiyas live in Gadchiroli district, which is who live in the forested district of Gadchiroli, which is also an aspirational district, supposed to be one of the most backward districts in the state, and they're concentrated in two tehsils of Bhamragad and Itapalli, very highly extremist-prone districts, and so on. We have the Kolams who live in Vidarbha and parts of Chandrapur, Nanded, And then we have the Katkari community who live closest to Mumbai. So who live in Western Maharashtra largely, which is the most developed part of the state. Now, if the original argument that faster the region grows, faster economic growth benefits everybody, then you should have anticipated that the Qataris actually have better standards of living, better livelihoods, better opportunity economic growth compared to Madhyas and Gatirs. Because they live closest to Mumbai, they live closest to Pune, they live closest to Nashik, Thane, so they live in that whole industrial corridor, which is the growth center of our state, and that's where the most vibrant economic activity exists, and that's where the most opportunities for economic upliftment are there, and that's probably also the reason why a lot of people actually migrate to these cities and become better off. So you would expect those who are living in these cities, who are living close to cities, tribal communities to living close to cities, to be far better off in terms of their livelihood opportunities compared to those who live in really remote economic backwaters like Gadchiroli, and particularly the extreme Chhattisgarh border, remote, very highly inaccessible districts, inaccessible areas like Bamragad and Etapur. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Okay, we have conducted a large survey of households. Nearly every single PVTG household, roughly about 120,000 households across the 3 PVTG communities, and you see a stark difference between the livelihoods of the Madhyas and the Katkaris. The Madhyas have the most stable of the livelihoods compared to the 3 PVTG communities. They have the biggest of the houses. They own the largest of the lands. They have, they are not migrating around in search of. There is virtually no forced migration, and they have their own cultural communities and settled modes of life. Compared to that, Katkaris are completely resourceless, have no jobs, have no access to employment have very poor actual level access to employment, and generally have very, very low standards of living compared to Madhyas. And in particular, almost all Katkaris are landless tribals compared to Madhyas, where most of them have land. Now, why is the situation like this? Why has this happened? That has happened for the very reason that the Katkaris live in the economically fastest growing part of the state. And because they were growing economically fastest part of the state, the resources that they based themselves on, okay, primarily, were resources like land, water, right? These are resources were very high demand, and because they were very high demand, they commanded a huge price, and therefore there's a lot of competition for these resources. And those who in turn had the resources, cultural resources, able to actually have expropriated these resources. And that is the reason why the Katkari community is now resourceless. I'll give you a simple example. We have Panvel, for example, and which is Panvel was a small village really based largely on paddy cultivation and some kind of horticulture and waterways. And there was a Katkari Pada in Panvel, which was called Olachi Wadi. What is Olachi Wadi? The habitation next to a brook. Yeah. So if you are driving to Pune from Mumbai, you will see a showroom called Simran Motors, which is a Maruti Motors showroom. Now, previously, before Simran Motors was there, and before there was this industrially developed Panvel, when Panvel was a small village, there is a small Katkari habitation called Olachi Wadi, which is where currently the Simran Motors stands. And Olachi Wadi means the habitation next to the small stream, because there's actually a stream which used to flow next to Olachi Wadi, and people who lived in the Olachi Wadi fished in the stream, survived on the, caught crabs in the stream, and also worked in the surrounding paddy fields as agricultural labor. Now, when Silco decided to develop Panvel into an industrial as a satellite city and make it a planned city, they planned a highway was passing right next to the Katkari Vasti, and obviously you can't have a Katkari Vasti right next to a habitat because that's all prime commercial property now. So the Katkari habitation was moved about 100 meters behind from their original location, and Simran Motors was built in their place. The stream, of course, was filled up, and after it was filled up, something else, some other buildings came up on it. All the paddy fields also vanished in the course of time, and now we have all concrete and showrooms and shops and industries where paddy fields used to be. Over the years, Orachi Vasti, which was built 40 or 50 years ago, slowly the buildings, the houses became dilapidated. Nobody rebuilt them again. So the Katkaris who were living in the Orachi Vasti actually shifted, moved out of those houses, so about another 100 meters, and now they are actually encroachers because that land was earmarked for something else. So we have an initial community, okay, which had livelihoods, which had livelihood resources, which had livelihood skills, okay, which were developed traditionally of paddy cultivation, of fishing, of maintaining that whole ecosystem, are now actually encroachers in a land where officially, as a particularly vulnerable tribal group, they enjoy habitat rights legally. Okay, but those habitat rights are, of course, cannot be imposed now because the whole record structure of this fast, rapidly growing urban areas becomes so complicated that you really can't even think of enforcing habitat rights for Katkaris over this entire area. So that's the story of impoverishment. Okay, so on the other hand, Madhyas continued to be dependent upon forests. They're a forest dependent community. They have rich forests and extremely valuable forest resources. For example, they have Tendupata, they have bamboo, they have maua, and a very well integrated community structure which allows them to actually manage all these forest resources properly. And the livelihoods of the Madhyas are now far better than Katkaris. Most economists would not be able to comprehend this because the standard dogma in economics would say faster the region grows, faster does everybody benefit. That doesn't happen with tribals. Tribals don't have tribals. Have not in general. This is the same story for tribals across the country. At least across Maharashtra, I know for sure that this is the story. Tribals have not been able to not been integrated. We have not succeeded in integrating tribal communities into the larger growth process because of certain institutional gaps. And I'm going to come to that. I'm going to now try and understand why that is the case and why we need a different kind of a uh, now, so it's quite clear that market-led economic growth does not necessarily trickle down to tribal communities, and tribal communities might actually be better off without this kind of an economic mainstreaming, which is a very, I think, a dangerous thing for tribal communities. It doesn't help them. So who should help them? If the market doesn't help them, then our economics understanding is that the state should help them. It's the job of the state to help people that the market cannot help. That is understanding in economic policy making. Okay. First choice, instrument of choice is markets, because markets have certain very attractive properties. They allocate resources efficiently and so on. But there are certain jobs which markets cannot perform, certain communities which markets cannot help, and those communities have to be helped by the state. That is the second line of thinking. I think even that line of thinking has failed. Because who is the state? Right? Do we really think that the state has the capacity to actually understand understand the needs of the tribal communities and be able to actually devise the right kind of policies and make sure that they're implemented across very wide, complex structure, complex tribal communities? I don't think that the state as an institution has both the information and the incentives to create structures which will actually be beneficial to tribals, no matter how much they try. Okay, so the state is, of course, can also be a very well-meaning institution, but its ability to actually make a ground level impact might be very, very limited. For one, there is a huge data gap. Okay, no, for a large number of cases, we don't even know. So, for one, there is nearly one of the problems with most of our state interventions is that there is a massive data gap. Okay, we don't even have basic information on, for example, if I ask somebody, how many Mahadev Kohlis are there in Maharashtra? We are unlikely to have that kind of information anyway. Where do they live? What are the things that they do? What are the activities that they engage in? What is the amount of land that they own? We have no idea, right? So as a state institution, in general, we have been extremely data poor, right? So that has been a problem. The second problem with state interventions, as or especially for tribal communities, is the orientation of the state intervention has always been that of welfareist state instead of a state which is a partner. Now, what is the problem with a welfare state? It's a paternalistic state. It's a patronizing state. So what does a patronizing state do? A patronizing state makes policies for tribals, right? So these essentially become top-driven policies, right? Since they're top-driven policies, just like top-driven growth does not benefit tribals, top-driven policies also do not benefit tribals because they are often out of sync with what tribal communities require, what are the real needs of tribal communities, the real aspirations of tribal communities. And very often there is no way in which these articulations, these aspirations can be articulated because of a lack of appropriate political mechanism which will carry the aspirations back to policymakers in a way which is strong enough to force them to fall in line. Right. So therefore, top-driven policies, and that's a very major problem. So, for example, and that has very serious implications. For example, in 2015 or 16, an activist boy from the Kolam community came to me with an answer to the RTI query, where he had asked how much of the CCD funds have actually been used for PVTG communities. And the answer was that 80% of the CCD funds, were community conservation development funds, had been unspent. And the reason was that most cases was beneficiaries not found. So what do you mean beneficiary is not found? Because that just means that people are not willing to take on the schemes which the government is offering them. And when we actually talked to the communities about why they did not take up the schemes, it turned out that the schemes were patently unsuitable or delivered in a way which made them completely impracticable at the tribal level. The problem was nobody essentially asked, right, what tribal communities want. And because we generally never ask. Why don't we never ask? Because we are a patronizing state. We are a paternalistic state. We are a tribal welfare state, right? We don't think of tribals as people who can develop themselves, right? We don't think of people as tribals as the energies to actually organize themselves into and ensure social mobility for them. We think that it is for us to handle them to move up, and we don't handle them sufficiently well enough or properly because we don't have ways of establishing communication. We don't have ways of understanding what tribal communities want because we don't have the right political structures. Yeah. So I think that is the biggest challenge for state intervention for tribal for the state's ability to actually help tribals. This lack of communication, lack of mechanisms which would kind of send information back strongly with certain political punch for the government to actually be able to take cognizance and work accordingly. So what is the solution? I think a very important part of the story is to so I think what is the solution? The solution is, to me, a critical strength of tribal communities. And when I say communities, I mean communities in the way people can organize themselves, self-organize themselves for achieving better lifestyles, better livelihoods for themselves. And I think in a lot of tribal communities in Maharashtra, the community idea is still very strong in that sense. Okay, and if the community idea is very strong, then that community idea can be leveraged, but that requires we trust communities. We put power in the hands of communities, and the state then we should actually only be able to handle these communities and provide the right kind of institutional structures which are currently lacking, which would help these communities to reap the benefits of the markets. Okay. if those institutions don't exist, if those institutions are not in place, the system will collapse, and that's one of the reasons why tribals can't really benefit from markets. To give you a very simple example, but which I've been dealing with for quite some time now. See, one of the problems, Katkaris are probably the really the worst of communities in terms of livelihood chances in Maharashtra, and they're so scattered and they move about so much in search of livelihood because they're landless communities. Most of tribals don't have land. They migrate wherever they can find work. Right? They're scattered all over the state and some of them outside the state. And of course, more than 50% of Katkaris actually live in non-TS scheduled areas in the state. Right? So they're far away from project offices where they can reach government, right? And they wherever they are in many places, they try to leverage their existing skills of fishing to somehow make a living. But that has become a problem now. So let me take you to a small town in Satara district, which is called Vai. Vai is on the banks of the Krishna River. The Krishna River originates in Mahabaleshwar about 30-35 kilometers away, and it's a shallow stream which flows through Vai, then Sangli becomes broader and eventually reaches South India where it becomes a very big river, one of the major rivers of the country. But in Vai, it's a small river. Katkaris fish and catch crabs in those small rivers. Now, if you consider the markets in Vai, then the crabs which the Katkaris catch and the small river fish that the Katkaris catch are considered a delicacy and in huge demand. Okay. Everybody wants those small fish, and those fish and crabs are in short supply. So you typically expect the prices to be high, and therefore Katkaris to actually make a decent living from fishing, because fish are expensive. If the fish are expensive, then those who catch fish should actually also have reasonably better standards of living. But that's not happening. Why is that not happening? You should go to the Vai market where the fish are sold at about 5:30 or 6 in the evening. Katkaris are out in the river catching fish, catching crabs the whole day. Then when they come home, the wives take all the catch, all the fish, all the crabs and get them to the market. When I was a small boy growing up in Vai, there were about 6 or 7 sellers. Now there are more than 50 from 4 surrounding villages, towns of villages who come and sell their crabs in Vai. Right. Now, crabs sell for about, say, depending upon size, suppose they're selling for 200 rupees a dozen. But because there are so many sellers there, and crabs are completely perishable and really spoil very, very quickly, the bargaining power of those women is is extremely limited, perhaps in fact non-existent, right? So and all the buyers know this. So the buyers typically bunch and come late in the evenings around when 7:30 or 8, and then the women are in a hurry to go home. The crabs anyway, if you don't sell them today, they're going to spoil tomorrow. So they quickly prices fall, and prices fall from 200 rupees to 100 rupees. There's a rapid fall in prices, and there are all these women selling the same commodity. So if one lady doesn't cut prices, somebody else will, and that creates a sudden cutthroat price competition, and prices rapidly fall. Right? Now this is the issue. So you have a commodity, you have fish which are in demand, which people value, which people are willing to buy at a high price if you can sell it at, but you can't sell it at that price. The reason you can't sell it at that price is because people are there's competition among tribes, right? Competition among women who are trying to sell and who want to get home, understandably. They have to cook, they have to feed children, and so it's right. So we have planned an intervention. We created a small intervention there. The intervention now is slowly, finding its feet. What we said was we had a meeting, we formed a groups. So all the surrounding 4 villages from which people come to sell crabs in Vai, we formed a committee. Then we created a fishermen's cooperative society. And then we approached the local collector and said, look here, these are women who are sitting on the roads here, selling fish, selling crabs, and they lose, the prices fall, they don't have any bargaining power. So we want to aggregate them into one monopolistic entity, right? So there'll be just one shop. Okay, this is just one shop from which we will sell crabs, we will sell small fish. Okay. So what we are now doing is all these 4 villages, from each village we have elected 4 people, and they sit and decide the price for crabs for a week, right? Okay. All people who catch crabs come to the market at 5:30, hand over the crabs to the store. Crabs get weighed, they get paid in cash, they go home. So women are no longer sitting in the streets selling crabs. Once these crabs are then sold through a single store, there are prices, there is a board, there is a price list. It says crabs of this size, this price, crab of this size, this price. There is no bargaining, you can't cut, you can't undercut, and almost all price, all crabs get sold. Now because of the pandemic, this arrangement at the moment is we need to put it back on its feet at where we started it at MEDA. But what we did was this created an institutional structure which enabled tribals to actually get a price, right? Actually set a price on what they were selling. Okay. The government helped us. How? They provided us with a room where we could actually sell this. Okay. Right, and then people got together, and now that whole thing, in the sense, the management of the whole shop and the whole structure will eventually be run well and smooth. And what this has done is, in the surrounding 4 villages now, there is a minimum support price for crabs, right? So crabs are selling for about 175 rupees in the shop, so they're selling at 175 rupees in the village. Nobody will be willing to sell you for anything below that. So price stabilization has happened in a way in which we are not dependent upon the government. The government will never allow a MSP for price for crabs. There's no minimum support price for crabs, right? But we have been able to fix the minimum support price for 4 villages. Now we are planning on replicating these structures all over Western Maharashtra and creating a network of these kind of fishing outlets for tribal communities. And of course it will take some work, but it's that kind of an institutional structure which was missing, which needs to be created. I'll give you another example. In Palghar district, we have many Katkari tribals who actually are cultivating forest land, and therefore their names are not entered on the Satbaras. Because their names are not entered on the Satbaras, they cannot sell their paddy to Tribal Development Corporation, which buys it at a minimum support price of something like 19 rupees. So the paddy was is still being bought by local traders who exploit tribals. Prices fall 10 rupees, 12 rupees, when they could have actually been selling it at 19 rupees had they had the title. So so we were working with these with my our Katkari colleagues in Palghar, and the idea was to actually understand what to do with the situation. Right. So if the TD, so we said, let's find out what the traders are doing, who are buying rice from us, who are buying paddy from us. What do you eventually end up doing? So we found that the traders actually take them to rice mills, and not only the milled rice is valuable, but also the rice husk, which can be sold for brick kilns, for poultry, and now for rice bran. So it's actually a profitable business. So we said, why don't we do this business ourselves? So if those traders can buy rice effectively, paddy, the rice millers can effectively buy paddy for 19 rupees or 20 rupees from traders, then if we are ourselves rice millers, then we can buy them from our farmers, from Katkaris, and we'll give a minimum support price to ourselves. So we sat down, we had meetings with the community, and then we kind of now have formed a farmer producer company of Katkaris, where all directors are Katkaris, all shareholders are Katkaris. And then we went to the Tribal Development Corporation and said, look here, we have formed this committee, we have formed this company. This company will make a massive difference to all the Katkari community, all the tribals really who are now currently being leased by private traders. Is going to have a large impact on tribal livelihoods, and your job is to protect livelihoods. So please give us money to set up a rice mill. Okay. And now our proposal is with the Tribal Development Corporation, and hopefully they will be sympathetic towards it. But that company is now ready, and that's a mechanism where we can get our minimum support prices. Right. So I think it is these institutional gaps which need to be filled. Okay, of connecting tribal communities. But community is a very important idea. Right? Communities have to come together. People have to organize themselves, and once they've organized themselves, then all that the state needs to do is to ease their connectivity with market opportunities, right? By putting in place the correct kind of institutional structures. But there are many reasons why the state doesn't do that. I'll give you before I end this part of my talk. I'll give you one startling example of how the interests of the state, especially financial interests of the state, many times come in the way of tribals. Now, you see, Mahua is critical to tribal livelihoods, and Maharashtra, of course, has, according to the Forest Department, about 120,000 metric tons of Mahua flowers every year, in in a very short span of about 2 months in April, May. Right. Now, according to the Forest Department data, 95% of this Mahua is in Gadchiroli district. Okay. This is Forest Department data, so they have only counted trees at the best in forest. They have also not obviously not counted trees which are on non-forest land in people's farms and all that. But I think it's about 2 lakh metric tons would be the total Mahua output in the state, and still about 85-90% of that could still be in Gadchiroli, especially in 2 tehsils of Bhamragad and Itapati. Now we decide to find out what happens to this Mahua flower. Once the Mahua flower falls from the tree, where does it go? Okay. Because in Maharashtra we have the Bombay Prohibition Act and all that. I'm coming to that. Right. So when the Mahua flower falls, we actually trace the whole thing. There are many small traders who come over from Chhattisgarh, especially, and Bengalis who are settled in Gadchiroli, who were settled after 1971 by the government of India in, displaced Bangladeshis in Gadchiroli, right? So they buy Mahua from farmers, from tribals who collect Mahua. Right, and this Mahua is then goes to Chhattisgarh into Chhattisgarh to small markets, small huts. From there, it goes to bigger places where now more aggregation is happening. So it will go to places like Pakhanjur, right? And from Pakhanjur, it goes to really big aggregation centers like Raipur, where there are cold storages which run into thousands of metric tons, and there are many such cold storages. Right, so we kept on looking at how the prices rise. So prices would rise from about 18-20 rupees in Bhamragad to around 22-23 rupees in Pakhanjur to about 30 rupees in eventually ending up in Raipur at around 40-45 rupees. You have an option there. You don't need to sell your Mahua all at one go in Raipur, where you suppose you bring about 20 tons of Mahua. You don't need to actually sell it at the going price. You can also put it in the cold storage, pay a rent, and when the price rises after Diwali to about 65, sometimes 70 rupees a kilo, that Mahua can be sold off, right? Because the trader will also work as a commission agent, right? So the massive profits will be made. So we asked the traders in Raipur. I said, look here, if you travel 50 kilometers, you get Mahua at 18 rupees. Why don't you go there and buy Mahua at 18 rupees instead of buying it from traders at 43-44 rupees here in Raipur, right? So the trader had a very interesting reason. He said only the problem that we have is we don't have the capacity to go and collect Mahua from household to household. So if you collect it from household to household, those transaction costs are very high. And because we can't do it, we are forced to buy it at Raipur from traders who collect it and bring it to us and sell it at 43. Otherwise, whenever it's available at in Bhamragad on the ground at about 18-90 rupees. So we said we will collect it for you. We are tribals and we have good reach with tribal communities. So we'll work with communities and we'll collect the Mahua, we'll aggregate the Mahua, and you have to simply come to our place, pick that Mahua up and bring it to Raipur, and you can get it there at, so instead of giving this trader 43 rupees, you give us 40 rupees or you give us 39 rupees. We are better off because we're anyway selling it 15 rupees or 16 rupees a kilo. So idea was to aggregate. The trader said that you will have to bring it here. Instead of me coming here, you bring it here and I will pay you 45 rupees per kilo. Now, by that time, the Tribal Development Corporation had heard of us and they were very thrilled. They said, okay, these guys are actually studying Mahua. So the MD said that we will give you our trucks. Right, Tribal Development Corporation has trucks in Gadchiroli. You can get the trucks to bring the Mahua. Okay, so it will help you with the bringing the trucks will bring Mahua. So we had aggregated the Mahua and we were watching the prices in Raipur. When we said 45, we thought prices would not rise anymore. We went to the Tribal Development Corporation office in Gadchiroli. Said, give us your trucks as you had promised. You have to take our Mahua and sell it. Tribal Development Corporation said, we can't do that. Why can't you do that? Because you will have to go and get a transport permit from the Excise Department office next door. So we went to the Excise Department office, said, look here, we are tribals and we are now carrying this Mahua from Gadchiroli and there's a good livelihood opportunity. We want to sell our Mahua. So give us a TS. They said, no, we can't give you a transport permit. Why? because there is a Bombay Prohibition Act which says that you're not supposed to collect mahua and sell mahua and like that. But I said there is the Forest Rights Act which says that mahua is a minor forest produce. Yes, so they said yes, we know that, but that's why we are allowing tribals to transport mahua wherever they want, provided it's for non-commercial reasons, but they can't sell it commercially. So I said, what's the point? We want to take mahua to, we want these trucks to take the mahua to Raipur to make money on it. That's why we want to do that. So they said, we can't give you a transport permit. So we said then, okay, so is there anybody else in this city, in Gadchiroli, who has a transport permit? They said there are 13 transport permits in this city, 12 of them are with the Tribal Development Corporation. So we said, very good, Tribal Development Corporation is going to give us trucks and they also have the licenses. So I mean, the problem is solved. So we went to the TDC. We said, why don't you guys have the license, you got the truck, so please take our mahua. They said, we can't do that. I said, why can't we do that? They said, because for which we have to buy your mahua at the minimum support price. And the minimum support price is 17 rupees. And more than that, we have stopped buying mahua because we used to previously buy a mahua and we didn't know how to store it. So it got all spoiled and made losses. So we are no longer buying mahua, really. So we were in a quandary. So we went to the private trader, the 13th man who had a license, 12 of the license with TDC, and he said, I'll take your mahua for 44 rupees. So he bought our mahua for 44. He bought mahua from us at 44 rupees a kilo and sold it. So imagine that the state wanted to help us, the state could not help us because it had a plethora of laws. There was a private trader who helped us. We got prices rose per kilo. About 20 rupees per kilo is the price appreciation we got. We just sold, I think, 20 tons at that time. But we are now looking at something like 100,000 metric tons as a mahua fall. Okay, so imagine your ability to actually, if you could collect all that mahua and if you got actual institutional mechanism, you could actually sell mahua, right, for 1 lakh, then that would actually, imagine getting 20 rupees a kilo benefit on about 100,000 metric tons. So you see the kind of resources which could flow in that region. But the interesting reason why that's not allowed, right? That's not allowed because we went to the excise department and tried to push a lot for tribal livelihoods. Now currently they have made some changes and they're now using it after a lot of pushing. But the reason was that they said that, look here, if we free this trade for mahua, if we allowed people to actually sell mahua, then there will be a lot of alcohol which will be brewed. And which means that if that kind of illicit liquor will then mean that people will no longer drink the country liquor that we sell in government shops, and therefore our revenue will suffer. That was the argument which the excise department makes. So just because the government of Maharashtra, and the only two places on which the government of Maharashtra makes money is through people who drink and people who drive. Right? I don't know why you can't do both the things at the same time. Right? So basically we make money on petrol or we make money on alcohol. So they were very worried about the excise. So the reason, so in order to keep excise revenues intact for the government of Maharashtra, we actually have a hurdle in the way in which tribals can improve their livelihood. So I think the critical gap that we have, what we need to do is to work with tribal communities in such a way that tribal communities can leverage what they have, and they have a lot of it. Right? They have skills, they have minor forest products, they have mahua, they have chironji, they have bamboo, they have agriculture, right? In a way where they can leverage it themselves. And I think the important role for the state is to work as a handholder and creating the institutional structures which are required so that tribal communities can benefit from the market, like creating databases, like creating places which will help tribal communities to form farmer producer companies, right? Okay, connect better with markets, instead of trying to regulate tribals and play the patronizing role which the governments very often see themselves as playing. So markets by themselves will not help tribals, governments will not help tribals, but communities, constructing communities and linking them better to the market, filling the institutional gaps in the middle. I think that is the key to ensuring better livelihoods. That is the point I wanted to make. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, and it's great. And if there is time for questions, then I'll be happy to take some.
Thank you, Dr. Neeraj. I think there are no as such question, but there are 1-2 comment, and basically I think that comment is support to what you have said, that basically it is regarding the policy for tribals and the policy makers also. There are some,
Right.
yeah. I think it is really very interesting presentation because you touched upon the very crucial and I think very complex nature of the points. And yeah, and there are, I think your presentation encouraged more question need to be
Right.
asked.
Right.
Uh, yeah. So thank you, sir.